The late afternoon sun painted the quiet suburban street in warm shades of gold. Children's laughter drifted faintly from a backyard, the hum of sprinklers ticked in the distance. Everything about the neighborhood felt calm, routine, almost peaceful, until the sharp blast of a police siren split the air in half. "Step out of the vehicle now." The command cracked like a whip, shattering the serenity. Officer Randall Briggs stood tall, hand resting dangerously close to his holster, the other stabbing the air toward the sleek black BMW idling at the curb. His voice carried a hard edge, laced with the kind of authority that demanded instant obedience. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Daniels. 17 years old, his expression froze at the sound of the order. For a split second, the teenager considered his options: run, argue, but quickly remembered the lessons drilled into him by his father. Keep calm. Keep your hands visible. Live to tell the story. Marcus slowly lowered the driver's side window, his every movement deliberate, careful, measured. His hands remained on the wheel, open for all to see. He wasn't about to make a sudden move that could be misread. "Sir, is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, respectful, almost rehearsed. Briggs smirked, leaning down so his shadow fell across the boy's face. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Marcus's tense expression, but his own eyes gleamed with something sharper: suspicion. "Problem?" "Yeah, kid. The problem is you behind the wheel of this car." He jabbed a finger toward the polished dashboard. "Now don't play dumb with me. Out of the vehicle." The sound of the officer's bark carried down the street like a signal flare. Curtains shifted. Doors opened. Curious neighbors emerged onto porches, some clutching their phones instinctively. The sight of a police officer confronting a young black teen in a luxury car was enough to draw attention. In this neighborhood, it was the kind of scene people recognized all too quickly. Inside the car, Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel but didn't argue. He knew what was at stake. One wrong word, one wrong glance, could send everything spiraling out of control. His father had warned him 1,000 times: respect buys you seconds, and seconds can save your life. With careful precision, Marcus lifted his wallet from the console, placed it on the dashboard, and pulled out his license and registration. He extended them out of the window, his voice calm. "Officer, I already have my license and registration right here." Briggs didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, he scoffed and snatched them away with a flick of his wrist, slapping the papers onto the roof of the car without looking. "Save it," Briggs sneered. "I've been on this job too long to fall for fake paperwork. Step out." The demand hung heavy in the air. A mother across the street gasped softly, whispering to her husband, "Isn't that Marcus Daniels?" Another neighbor muttered, "Why is he being stopped?" "That's his car." Phones lifted higher, red recording lights glowing like fireflies. Marcus drew in a slow breath. His chest rose and fell, but his eyes remained focused. Calm. Collected. He unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements exaggerated for clarity, and pushed open the door. The hinge creaked, echoing the tension that thickened the air around them. Briggs stepped back, hand brushing his holster again, though there was no sign of threat. His lips curled into a smirk. He was enjoying this. Enjoying the power, the control, the spectacle of a teenager forced into submission in front of an audience. Marcus placed his feet on the pavement, raising his hands slightly as he straightened up. His heart hammered against his ribs, but outwardly, he was composed. The crowd grew. More whispers, more murmurs. The balance of the moment was fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. Briggs tapped his flashlight against the side of the BMW, despite the bright sun overhead. Hands on the wheel. "Move slow, boy. Don't give me a reason." "I'm not resisting, sir," Marcus replied quietly. But the story had already begun to spiral. This was no ordinary traffic stop. This was the spark that would ignite a fire, one that would burn away the arrogance of a cop who thought his badge made him untouchable, and shine a spotlight on the quiet strength of a teenager who refused to lose his dignity. And as the cameras rolled, the neighborhood bore witness. To understand why this traffic stop would soon shake an entire community, you first need to know the young man at the center of it all. Marcus Daniels wasn't just another teenager driving down a suburban street. He wasn't the kind of kid you could dismiss as reckless, careless, or entitled. If anything, Marcus was the kind of son every parent wished for, and the kind of neighbor people quietly admired from a distance. At 17, Marcus had already built a reputation that spoke louder than any flashy introduction. Teachers called him bright and dependable. His classmates leaned on him for advice, knowing he wouldn't judge them. Even the elderly couple who lived 3 houses down said, "That boy? He always helps with groceries without being asked." He wasn't perfect, of course, no teenager is, but Marcus carried himself with a maturity that seemed years beyond his age. Some said it came from being raised by Chief Harold Daniels, a man who ran the local police department with discipline and dignity. Others said it came from the loss Marcus had experienced at a young age, the kind of loss that shapes you, sharpens you, and teaches you to value things others take for granted. That loss was his grandfather. Marcus's grandfather, William Daniels, was a man carved from hard work. A mechanic by trade, he had spent decades building a modest life, saving every dollar he could, not for luxury but for legacy. He didn't live to see Marcus grow into a young man, but he left behind something more than stories or memories. He left behind a car. A jet black BMW sedan. It wasn't brand new. It wasn't the latest model. But to Marcus, it was priceless. Every shine of its polish had reflected not just paint, but history. Every rumble of its engine carried the echoes of a man who believed in working hard and giving back. His grandfather had maintained that car meticulously, keeping it spotless even when money was tight. And when he passed away, it was written in his will, "This car belongs to Marcus." For Marcus, that BMW wasn't about status. It wasn't about turning heads or showing off. It was about carrying a piece of his grandfather with him. When he sat behind the wheel, he didn't feel like just a teenager driving a nice car. He felt connected. Grounded. Protected. But not everyone saw it that way. To some, like Officer Randall Briggs, a young black teenager in a BMW didn't spell legacy. It spelled trouble. It spelled doesn't belong. And that's where the story of pride and prejudice collided. On that particular afternoon, as Marcus pulled onto the street after visiting a friend, he wasn't blasting music or speeding recklessly. He wasn't trying to draw attention. He was simply driving, thinking about homework he needed to finish and whether his mom would make his favorite meal for dinner. The BMW purred beneath him, smooth as silk, almost soothing. He rested his hand on the leather steering wheel, the way his grandfather once did. For Marcus, this was comfort. For Briggs, watching from his patrol car a block away, it was suspicion. Briggs saw the polished car first, then the driver. His eyes narrowed. In his mind, the equation was simple: teenager plus expensive car equals stolen. It was a conclusion he had jumped to before, one that had gone unchecked too many times. Meanwhile, Marcus adjusted his rearview mirror, completely unaware that he had already been judged, labeled, and condemned, all before the flashing lights ever turned on. What the neighbors who were now gathering around didn't yet realize was that this wasn't just a traffic stop. This was a collision between two legacies. One, a teenager carrying forward the pride and love of his late grandfather through a simple car. The other, a police officer carrying forward years of arrogance, prejudice, and unchecked authority through a badge. And as fate would have it, the two collided in the middle of that quiet suburban street, under the gaze of neighbors, under the eyes of cameras, under the weight of history. Marcus Daniels wasn't just another kid in a car. He was a symbol of what happens when dignity and respect are tested against arrogance and bias. This was never just about a BMW. This was about what it represented, and the storm it was about to unleash. To understand why Officer Randall Briggs stopped Marcus Daniels that day, you have to understand the man himself. On paper, Randall Briggs looked like any other officer, years on the force, commendations filed neatly in his personnel record, and a reputation among superiors as by the book. But paper is flat. It doesn't show the cracks beneath the surface, the rot that grows when authority is left unchecked. Within the community he patrolled, Briggs was a very different story. He was known less for service and more for swagger. Less for protection and more for intimidation. His name carried whispers, the kind that drifted from porches at night. Better hope Briggs isn't the one who pulls you over. Young men, especially young black men, knew him by reputation. He's the one who stops you just for walking. He's the one who asks 1,000 questions if your car looks too nice. Some avoided certain streets altogether, hoping to slip under his radar. For Briggs, the badge wasn't a shield of responsibility, it was a hammer of control. He wore it like a crown, strutting through his patrols with the confidence of someone who believed rules applied to everyone but himself. To his mind, every stop was a performance, every confrontation a chance to remind people who held the power. And that day, when his eyes landed on Marcus Daniels behind the wheel of a gleaming black BMW, Briggs didn't see a teenager honoring his grandfather's memory. He saw opportunity. He muttered to himself in his squad car, lips curling into a smirk. 17, maybe 18 tops. No way that's his ride. Probably boosted it. Easy collar. His hand hovered over the siren switch. His pulse quickened, not from danger, but from anticipation. He loved moments like this. The flashing lights, the rush of adrenaline, the crowd that would inevitably gather, it was all fuel for his ego. Briggs slammed the button, and the red and blue lights erupted against the Comstreet. Tires screeched as Marcus pulled over, his careful compliance mistaken by Briggs as guilt. When Briggs stepped out of his patrol car, neighbors immediately noticed the shift in his body language. Shoulders back, chest puffed, one hand resting deliberately on his holster. It wasn't just procedure. It was theater. A man watering his lawn muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." A teenager across the street whispered, "That's Briggs. Watch, he's gonna make it ugly." And ugly it always became. Stories about Briggs circulated like warnings. The young man stopped while walking home from basketball practice because he didn't look like he lived in the neighborhood. The mother forced to step out of her car with her groceries spilled on the curb while Briggs searched her trunk without cause. The high school honor student pulled over twice in 1 week for fitting the description of a suspect that somehow never existed. Each story added another layer to his reputation. To some, it was exhausting. To others, terrifying. But to Briggs, it was victory. Every complaint filed against him was met with the same outcome, a shrug from higher-ups, paperwork buried under piles of bureaucracy. And so, arrogance grew. That arrogance was alive and burning when he leaned into Marcus's window, sneering at the license and registration he hadn't even looked at. It guided his hand when he slapped the documents onto the roof of the car without care. It sharpened his voice when he barked, "Step out. Save your lives for someone who believes them." To the crowd forming on the sidewalk, it was déjà vu. They had seen this play before. But what Briggs didn't realize was that this performance would not end like the others. Because Marcus Daniels was not just another teenager. He was the son of Chief Harold Daniels, the very man who had built a career on justice and integrity, the kind of values Briggs mocked with every arrogant stop. Briggs thought he was writing another story of dominance. Instead, he was setting the stage for his own downfall, a downfall that would unfold under the unblinking gaze of phone cameras and the sharp eyes of a father who would not let arrogance destroy his son. And when the smoke cleared, Randall Briggs would no longer be known as the officer who swaggered through the community unchecked. He would be remembered for something else entirely, humiliation. The kind that lingers. The kind that burns. The kind that no badge can ever protect you from. The sun hung high, spilling sharp light across the quiet street, but the atmosphere around Marcus's BMW grew darker with every second. Officer Randall Briggs stood with one hand on his holster, his chest puffed with authority he believed was absolute. His mirrored shades reflected the nervous young man inside the car, but his voice cut through the air with aggression. "Hands on the wheel. Now." Marcus obeyed instantly, his palms open, fingers spread across the leather steering wheel. He spoke calmly, voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "Officer, I already have my license and registration. They're right here." He lifted the papers carefully, the movement slow and deliberate, just as his father had taught him. But Briggs barely glanced at them. Instead, he scoffed and slapped the documents onto the roof of the car like they were worthless scraps of paper. "Save it. I've been on this job too long to fall for fake paperwork." Marcus blinked, his jaw tightening. "Fake? Sir, they're not." "Out of the vehicle!" Briggs barked, cutting him off. His hand yanked at the door handle, flinging it open with force. The noise snapped the attention of neighbors like a firecracker. Curtains shifted. Phones lifted. People stepped closer to their porches, some whispering, some shaking their heads knowingly. Marcus swallowed hard. His instincts told him to defend himself, to argue, but his father's voice echoed in his mind, "Stay calm. Respect buys you seconds." Slowly, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. He stepped out of the car with exaggerated movements, keeping his hands visible. His sneakers crunched against the pavement as he stood before Briggs, taller than the officer expected, but still carrying the nervous energy of a teenager caught in the headlights. Briggs circled him like a predator sizing up prey. His flashlight tapped against the side of the BMW, though the afternoon sun made it unnecessary. The metallic clink was deliberate, meant to rattle. "You think I'm stupid?" Briggs muttered loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Kid your age driving a car like this? Please. You expect me to believe this belongs to you?" "It does, sir," Marcus said evenly. "It was given to me." "Given to you?" Briggs scoffed, stepping closer until his shadow swallowed Marcus whole. "You think you can spin me some sob story? Not buying it. Hands on the hood." "No." Marcus hesitated, his lips parting as if to protest. But before he could speak, Briggs shoved him forward. The boy's chest hit the cool metal of the BMW, the impact jarring through his ribs. His arms were yanked behind his back, cold steel snapping tight around his wrists. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's Marcus Daniels," a woman whispered urgently. "Isn't his father the chief?" A man shook his head, disbelief etched into his face. "This isn't right. He's a good kid." Phones were raised higher, capturing every second. Red recording lights blinked in unison like watchful eyes. Briggs, unfazed, pressed the cuffs tighter, his lips curling into a smirk. He lifted his radio to his mouth, speaking with smug finality. "Got myself a thief today. Black male, approximately 17. In possession of a stolen BMW. Requesting backup for transport." Marcus winced at the sting of metal biting into his wrists. He turned his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "Sir, this car isn't stolen. It's mine." "Yeah, sure, kid," Briggs sneered, pressing his weight harder against him. "You expect me to believe a punk like you owns a ride like this? You should be thanking me for not pulling you out sooner." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, angrier. Someone muttered, "He didn't even look at the license." Another whispered, "This is going to blow up bad." But Marcus didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't let anger win. Instead, he held himself steady against the hood, his breathing controlled, almost as if he knew something Briggs didn't. Because deep down, Marcus understood one thing: truth has a way of surfacing. And arrogance, no matter how loud, eventually silences itself. The cameras caught it all, the shove, the cuffs, the smirk on Briggs's face, and the quiet dignity of a teenager refusing to break. What neither Briggs nor the crowd realized was that this confrontation was far from over. The real storm was still on its way, carried in the growl of an engine that had not yet reached the scene. The midday calm of the neighborhood had turned into a buzzing storm. What started as a single flashing siren had now become the center of an entire block's attention. Phones were raised high, their lenses catching every move, every shove, every sneer, every second of Officer Randall Briggs's authority trip. Marcus stood pressed against the hood of his grandfather's BMW, wrists locked in steel, the sun baking down on his skin. His breathing was steady, but inside, the heat of humiliation churned through his chest. He hadn't done a thing wrong. And yet here he was, paraded like a criminal for all to see. Briggs clicked his radio again, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dispatch, I've got one in custody. Possible grand theft auto. Blackmail. 17. Stolen BMW." The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Gasps rose from the crowd. "He just said stolen?" "That's Marcus Daniels," a woman cried, her phone trembling in her hand. "Everyone knows that car was his grandfather's," another man muttered, shaking his head. Briggs ignored them, tightening his grip on Marcus's arm as if to prove dominance. He sneered at the watching faces. "Y'all better back it up. Police business." But no one moved. In fact, the crowd grew bolder. People leaned against fences, mothers clutched their kids, teenagers whispered excitedly as their live stream counters ticked upward. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his voice steady. "Officer, he showed you his license. We all saw it. Why didn't you even check it properly?" Briggs turned sharply, jabbing a finger in the man's direction. "Sir, unless you want to be charged with obstruction, I suggest you stay quiet and let me do my job." The man raised his hands, backing off, but the cameras kept rolling. Every word, every threat was etched into digital memory. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but ringing clear enough for the crowd to hear. "Officer, you're humiliating me in front of my neighbors for something I didn't do. Please. At least look at the documents." Briggs's face twisted. He leaned close, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "You think you're clever, boy? Think you can talk your way out of this? Not today." Marcus closed his eyes, steadying himself. He refused to let rage escape his chest, refused to give Briggs the satisfaction of a reaction. From the crowd, a teenager shouted, "We're live right now. The whole internet's watching." That made Briggs flinch, just for a fraction of a second, but his pride shoved it away. He puffed his chest, waving dismissively at the cameras. "Good. Let 'em watch. Maybe they'll learn what happens when you steal." The arrogance was caught in full high definition. His words, his posture, his contempt, it was all streaming in real time. Marcus turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the dozens of phones aimed at him. He felt something shift. Humiliation burned, yes, but underneath it was something stronger. A quiet certainty. Every second Briggs held him like this was another nail in the officer's own coffin. "Don't worry, Marcus," a woman in the crowd called out, her voice firm and protective. "We see what's happening. Everyone sees." Briggs snapped his head toward her. "Ma'am, step back before I cite you for interference." The crowd murmured angrily, the air thick with tension. Briggs had miscalculated. What he thought was control had become spectacle. What he believed was dominance had become evidence. Still, he clung to his arrogance. He shoved Marcus upright, gripping the cuffs, parading him toward the back of the squad car like a trophy. "Hope you enjoyed that car," he mocked loudly. "Because you won't be driving it again." A ripple of disapproval swept through the crowd. Someone booed. Another muttered, "He's digging his own grave." Marcus kept his head high, refusing to let his shoulders slump. He wasn't going to give this man the satisfaction of seeing him broken. His silence, his dignity, became louder than Briggs's mockery. And all the while, the cameras kept rolling. By now, dozens of live streams were spreading across social media. Comments poured in, racial profiling at its finest. "That's Chief Daniels' son, isn't it? This officer's career is over." But Briggs didn't know. Or maybe he didn't care. He still believed the badge on his chest made him untouchable. As Marcus stood there, hands bound and reputation dragged through the dirt, the crowd bore witness. Humiliation had been intended for him. But unknowingly, Briggs was etching his own downfall into history, broadcasted for the entire world to see. The stage was set. The moment was captured. And the storm that would destroy Briggs's arrogance was just over the horizon. The low rumble of an engine broke through the tense standoff like a drumbeat announcing war. Heads in the crowd turned as a sleek, black police SUV rolled into view, its lights flashing silently. The murmurs hushed, replaced by sharp intakes of breath. Everyone recognized that car. The SUV came to a stop with deliberate force, its tires crunching against the curb. The door swung open, and out stepped a man who seemed to carry the weight of the entire neighborhood in his stride. Chief Harold Daniels. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform pressed to perfection, the chief didn't need sirens to announce authority. His presence was enough. His eyes scanned the scene, first the crowd, then the raised phones, then his son, bent over the hood of a car he knew as well as his own heartbeat. Marcus. His only boy. A hush swept over the block. Even children clutched their parents tighter. The chief's reputation was well known, fair but firm, respected by his officers and his community alike. But in this moment, his jaw was stone, his eyes burning with a fire no one dared misread. Officer Briggs, the chief's voice sliced through the silence, low and controlled. Would you like to explain why my son is in handcuffs? The crowd erupted in whispers. His son? Oh my God, that's the chief's boy? This cop is finished. Briggs's swagger faltered. For the first time, his shoulders slumped ever so slightly. Color drained from his face, but he forced a crooked smile. Chief, sir, I thought he matched a description. Black male, young, nice car. Looked suspicious. The chief took one step forward, then another, his boots crunching against the asphalt like thunder. His voice hardened. Didn't look what, officer? Briggs stammered, the words choking in his throat. Didn't look like he belonged in it. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The phone zoomed in. The words hung heavy, undeniable, immortalized in 100 live streams. The chief's face twitched, not with weakness, but with barely contained fury. His eyes flicked to Marcus, whose cheeks were flushed with the sting of humiliation, and then back to Briggs. You humiliated my son, the chief said, each word deliberate, sharp as a blade. In front of this community. You cuffed him without cause. You profiled him. And you did it in broad daylight, under every camera in this crowd. The crowd murmured their agreement, emboldened by the chief's words. A woman shouted, We all saw it, Chief. He didn't even check the papers. Briggs licked his lips, sweat forming at his temple. He fumbled for justification. Chief, I thought it was stolen. The paperwork looked. Enough, Daniels snapped, his voice echoing down the block. You didn't look at the paperwork. You didn't verify. You didn't follow protocol. What you did follow was prejudice. He stepped even closer until he towered over Briggs, his shadow casting across the trembling officer. Now remove those cuffs. Immediately. With shaking hands, Briggs unclipped the cuffs from Marcus's wrists. The metallic click of freedom was louder than any siren. Marcus rubbed his wrists, stepping back toward his father, who placed a firm, protective arm around his shoulders. The chief looked down at his son. Are you all right, Marcus? Marcus's voice was low but steady. I tried to tell him, Dad. He wouldn't listen. The chief nodded, his jaw tight. I know, son. I know. Then he turned back to Briggs, his voice dropping into something cold and final. Officer Randall Briggs, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Hand over your weapon and badge. The crowd gasped audibly. Phones shook with excitement. History was happening before their eyes. Briggs froze, eyes wide. Chief, please. This is a misunderstanding. Your arrogance has already spoken enough, Daniels cut in sharply. Badge. Now. With trembling fingers, Briggs unclipped his badge and weapon, placing them hesitantly into the chief's waiting hand. His face flushed crimson, his earlier smirk completely erased. The chief turned, raising his voice to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for remaining calm. Justice will be handled. This officer's conduct does not represent the values of our department. Applause broke out, not loud, but steady and growing. Marcus stood tall beside his father, dignity intact. The humiliation Briggs had tried to brand him with had flipped, burning instead onto the officer himself. Briggs, stripped of his authority, stood small and hollow in the middle of the crowd he once tried to intimidate. And every second of his disgrace was captured on camera. The tide had turned. The turning point was here. And Briggs's downfall had only just begun. The neighborhood slowly calmed after the dramatic scene, but the echoes of what had happened didn't end there. The moment Chief Daniels relieved Officer Randall Briggs of his duty, the story stopped belonging to the street, it belonged to the world. Dozens of cell phones captured every detail. From the moment Briggs slammed Marcus against the hood, to his arrogant smirk as he dismissed valid paperwork, to the instant Chief Daniels demanded his badge, the entire story was preserved in crystal clarity. By evening, the videos hit social media like wildfire. The hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag justice for Marcus. Hashtag badge stripped. Hashtag Chief Daniels. Clips were shared across TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Within hours, millions had seen Officer Briggs's arrogance unravel. One video showed the precise moment Briggs sneered, didn't look like he belonged in it. That 10-second clip alone racked up hundreds of thousands of shares, with captions like, "Right arrow, this is what profiling looks like." "Right arrow, arrogance on full display." "Right arrow, imagine cuffing the police chief's own son." News anchors picked it up before the night was over. By the next morning, Briggs's name was on every major network. Tonight, a small-town officer is under fire after detaining a teenager without cause, unaware that the boy's father was none other than the police chief himself. Marcus, meanwhile, sat quietly in the family living room, his phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. Friends messaged him. "Bro, you're trending worldwide. You handled that like a king. Mad respect. I can't believe you kept your cool. You're stronger than most grown men." Marcus read them silently, his chest heavy. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't wanted to be the center of a national storm. But at least, he thought, maybe something good would come out of it. His father, Chief Daniels, stood near the window, arms crossed as reporters camped outside the house. He turned to Marcus. "Son, I'm proud of you. You showed more dignity in 10 minutes than that man did in his whole career." Marcus looked down, fiddling with his phone. "It still hurts, Dad. Being treated like that, just because of who I am, or what I look like." The chief knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "I know it does. And that's why it matters that you didn't break. You exposed something bigger than just one man's arrogance. You showed the truth." Across town, Briggs's world was collapsing. He sat in his dimly lit kitchen, staring blankly at the TV. His own face filled the screen, frozen mid-smirk as he dismissed Marcus's paperwork. The commentator's voice was merciless. "This officer, long accused of racial bias, is now under investigation following a public confrontation caught on multiple cameras." The police department confirmed that Officer Randall Briggs has been suspended without pay pending further review. Briggs slammed the remote down, his face red with rage and humiliation. He had once strutted into the station with pride, badge gleaming, certain of his power. Now, stripped of that badge, he was just another man, exposed, disgraced, and drowning in a storm of his own making. Even his phone was relentless. Messages poured in. "You're a disgrace to the uniform. Finally caught on tape. Hope you never wear that badge again." He tossed the phone across the room, burying his face in his hands. Meanwhile, at the department, the chief addressed the press. Cameras flashed as he stood behind a podium, his voice measured but stern. Let me be clear, the actions of Officer Briggs do not represent the values of this department. Racial profiling, abuse of authority, and misconduct will not be tolerated. We are pursuing a full investigation. Applause followed. Not just from the reporters, but from community members gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Justice. Dignity. Equality." Marcus stood behind his father during that speech, his presence alone a statement. He didn't need to say much, the world had already seen him. Calm, composed, wrong but unbroken. The fallout was swift and merciless. Briggs went from being a feared officer to a viral symbol of disgrace. He lost his badge, his pay, his reputation, all in less than 24 hours. And Marcus? He gained something greater than sympathy. He earned respect. Not just from his neighborhood, but from strangers across the country who saw in him a reflection of resilience. As the chief later told him quietly at home, "Son, sometimes justice doesn't come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with truth, and truth always finds its way out." And in this case, truth had found its way onto every screen in America. The dust began to settle, though the echoes of what had happened on that suburban street would never fully fade. The neighborhood that once whispered quietly about Marcus Daniels now spoke his name with pride. What was meant to be his humiliation had instead become Officer Briggs's undoing. For Marcus, life didn't return to normal overnight. Every time he pulled into school in his grandfather's BMW, heads turned. Some students waved. Others gave him nods of respect, like he'd survived a battlefield. Teachers pulled him aside in the hallways. "We saw what happened, Marcus. You handled yourself like a man twice your age. Never forget that dignity will carry you further than anger ever could." Marcus would just nod politely, though inside, he was still sorting through the whirlwind. He hadn't set out to be a symbol. He just wanted to drive his grandfather's car in peace. At home, his father made sure he knew the weight of what had happened. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Chief Daniels looked at his son with a mix of pride and sadness. "You know, Marcus," the chief began, "when I was your age, I faced the same kind of suspicion. Same looks. Same assumptions. The difference is, back then, no one had cameras. No one believed us." Marcus frowned. "So it's always been like this?" The chief sighed deeply, staring at the horizon. "For too long. But that doesn't mean it will always be this way. Every time someone like you handles it with calm, with grace, the world takes notice. And slowly, things change." Marcus leaned back, thinking about the crowd, the phones, the gasps when the truth came out. "I didn't feel brave," he admitted softly. "I just felt angry. But I kept hearing your voice in my head. Stay calm. Don't give them what they want." His father smiled faintly. "That's bravery, son. Courage isn't about not feeling fear or anger. It's about controlling it. You did exactly that." Across town, Briggs had become a ghost. His name was stained. Once he couldn't walk into a diner without tipping his chin up like he owned the place. Now, even stepping into a grocery store felt unbearable. People whispered. Some glared. Others openly mocked him. Online, his face had become a meme. Right Arrow didn't look like he belonged captioned under every luxury car photo. Right Arrow, his badge being handed over, replayed endlessly, turned into GIFs, sound bites, and mock remixes. His career was over. His arrogance had collapsed into silence. But for Marcus, the focus wasn't Briggs anymore. It was about what the moment had taught him. One Saturday afternoon, as he watched the BMW in the driveway, a little boy from down the street walked up shyly. He couldn't have been more than 10. "Hey, Marcus," the boy said, fidgeting with his hands. "My mom showed me the video. You were really cool. You didn't yell or cry when the cop was mean to you. I want to be like that when I grow up." Marcus knelt, meeting the boy's wide eyes. His voice was gentle. Listen, it's not about being cool. It's about knowing who you are. No one can take that away from you, no matter how hard they try. Remember that, okay? The boy grinned and nodded before running off, his small feet pounding the pavement. Marcus watched him go, a quiet smile forming on his own face. That was when it hit him, the legacy of the moment wasn't just about his own dignity. It was about every kid who would see him, every person who'd watch the video and learn that arrogance and prejudice crumble when faced with patience and truth. Later, his father joined him outside, placing a hand on his shoulder as they looked at the car together. You know, Chief Daniels said softly, your grandfather would be proud. Not just that you're keeping his car alive, but that you're carrying his spirit. Strength. Patience. Pride. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of both burden and blessing. I think I get it now, Dad. It's not just a car. It's a reminder of who I am, and who I refuse to let anyone tell me I can't be. The chief smiled. Exactly, son. And remember, power misused always crumbles. But dignity? Dignity lasts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus ran his hand along the polished hood of the BMW. It gleamed, not as a symbol of luxury, but as a legacy of love, resilience, and truth. And with every engine roar down that suburban street, he wasn't just driving his grandfather's car, he was driving a lesson into history. Arrogance blinds. Prejudice destroys. But dignity? Dignity outlives them all.